If you think of, like a centipede, I've used this analogy this week a couple of times, and each of the legs is an aspect of 9/11, part of the story, part of the claim. Every single leg has got an Achilles heel, something that shows that the official story can't be true. And we have probably the most obvious Achilles heel is Building 7. You know about Building 7?
Yeah.
Well, you may do, but enormous numbers of people worldwide don't.
For those who don't, Building 7 was the third building that came down that day.
If you said to most people, it still is most people, how many buildings came down on 9/11? They'd say 2.
Yeah.
In fact, there was a court case in New York where it was related to 9/11, and the subject of Building 7 came up, and the judge actually asked, what's Building 7, right?
Wow.
So Building 7 was a 47-story steel frame building.
A skyscraper, yeah.
Owned by Larry Silverstein, who owned it before he bought the lease, weeks before 9/11, for the Twin Towers. And if you go on the internet and you put in, on YouTube, you put in Building 7 collapse or whatever, you will see the most obvious controlled demolition you'll ever see. You know, where you see from time to time these buildings are brought down. So the charges are in the building in specific sequences, so that when they go off, the building falls on its own footprint and don't bang into other buildings, right?
And most people think that takes weeks to set up.
Well, I'm going to come to that, because that's very relevant to the obvious lies that we've been told about Building 7. First of all, in the whole history of engineering and architecture and building history, a steel frame building has never fallen, before or since, because of fire. And the official story is that this 47-story steel frame building fell because of an office furnishings fire. That's the official frickin' story. Now, the fact that it was a controlled demolition, he didn't mean to say this, he got caught with his pants down as well as on fire, came with an interview that Larry Silverstein did. It was like a retrospective on PBS, Public Service Broadcasting in America, of 9/11. And he was asked about his memories of that day, September the 11th, 2001. And he talks about Building 7. And he said this, I quote him word for word in the book. It's an extraordinary quote. He said, the fire commander came to me that afternoon, because Building 7 was not hit by a plane, and it fell at 5:20 in the afternoon. And he said, the fire commander came to me, and he said, we're struggling to cope with the fire in Building 7. And I said to him, there's been such a tragic loss of life today. Let's just pull it. And we agreed to pull it, and then shortly afterwards, he said, we watched the building come down. Right.
Wow.
Now, you've just hit on it straight away. 2 things, first of all. Fire commanders, well, actually 3. Let's start with number 1. That fire commander in this mythical exchange has never, ever come forward and said, I had that conversation. No one's ever said that, I had that conversation with him. And they have been asked. Number 2 is that you don't pull buildings with fire departments. You pull them with professional controlled demolition experts. And 3, point you made, you take weeks putting the charges in the right place for the building to fall on its own footprint. And here's Larry Silverstein with, barefaced cheek doesn't even begin to cut it, saying that they had this conversation, and not long afterwards, that afternoon, the building came down. But there's another thing. The official investigation into 9/11, called the 9/11 Commission, first of all, Bush and Cheney, who were running the White House, actually Cheney was, not Bush, They were forced kicking and screaming to even have an inquiry. Now, you've just had this monumental outrage on American soil. 3,000 people are dead. You would have surely the most painstaking investigation into what happened, who did it, so it would never be able to happen again. They fought to have an inquiry at all. Then, when they were forced into it, they appointed Henry Kissinger as the guy to lead it, which is, it's just extraordinary. You couldn't think of anyone more appropriate. I mean, when Kissinger's lying because his lips are moving, right? And right the way through bloody history, he's been a front man for this cabal and an insider of this cabal most of his adult bloody life. Anyway, people didn't buy that. Kissinger, and eventually he had to stand down.
Kissinger just looks evil as well, though.
Well, Kissinger had to stand down when he was pressured to reveal his client list of his company called Kissinger Associates. Now, if he did reveal his client list, then that would have opened a massive can of worms. So he stood down. And so they then put a guy in charge called Thomas Keane. But the key guy, this is where I'm going with this Building 7, the key guy was a fella called Philip Zelikow. Philip Zelikow was a Bush insider, Bush administration insider, wrote a book with Condoleezza Rice, who was Secretary of State at the time of 9/11. And he was put in charge of the commission as executive director. And people on the inside and even mainstream journalists were saying Zelikow's running the whole thing. In fact, it came out a year after the commission began that Zelikow and someone else had written the headings and the subheadings and basically the outline of the final report before the commission had even met.
Paint by numbers almost.
Yeah, and where I'm going with this is that, of course, if you're compiling a report explaining what happened on 9/11, you have a bloody big problem with Building 7. Because although the official story, literally, staggeringly, is that office furnishings fire brought it down, it's not credible.
It's the speed in which it came down, isn't it? If this was engulfed in flames, like you see many buildings in the past have been, and then it came down, I mean, even then, it's steel. It's steel. It's not fucking going anywhere. But anyway,
the Building 7.
It wasn't even that on fire that much.
No, it wasn't.
When you watch the video,
the fire was out by the time it came down.
The barely. I mean, the twin towers at the top, obviously upwards, they were on fire. But even still, that's a debate in itself.
Yeah, well, I can go on to that as well.
But this Building 7 is. It looks fine, and then all of a sudden, 10 seconds, it's gone.
The first 2.5 seconds that building fell was free fall speed. And you can only have free fall speed when anything below has been removed before it gets there.
So no resistance, basically.
Yeah, that's how
it's like dropping an apple from the same height and it falls at the same
That's
speed.
how controlled demolitions work.
Yeah.
The lower part of the building is gone before the top part of the building is coming down. That's why it kind of turns to dust. Anyway, just to finish the point, Zelikow, who was running an operation literally to defend the official story and keep out anything that challenged it, he had a problem with Building 7. What do? I can't explain it. And it's the most obvious controlled demolition. I quote in the book a series of demolition experts saying it was a controlled demolition. And so the way he got round it is he never mentioned it. Can you imagine that? A commission report, an official commission report into 9/11.
3 buildings.
And one of the 3 buildings coming down isn't even freaking mentioned. Why? Because it's an Achilles heel. And this is the point. If they lied through their teeth about Building 7, which they clearly did, there's a great organization called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, as there are firefighters for 9/11 Truth and pilots for 9/11 Truth. These are organizations that were set up after the attacks to challenge these professionals in their field, to challenge the different aspects of the story, saying that couldn't have happened. I'll give you a quick one. I just get into the Twin Towers. So I'll give you a quick one on pilots for 9/11 Truth and the stuff they've got out, and other people have got out as well. Flight 77, which was supposed to have hit the Pentagon, the official story is the pilot was a guy called Annie Hanjour, right? Annie Hanjour was banned from hiring a one-engine plane 6 weeks before 9/11 because he was so incompetent and dangerous.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And these pilots who've come together, some of the pilots in Pilots for 9/11 Truth actually flew those planes. They were American Airlines, United Airlines pilots. And they say that turn, that spiral to hit the Pentagon, so they claim, they couldn't have done.